Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Want to boost revenue and attract new customers? Partner with Harvest Hosts, a free marketing platform generating $50 million annually for farms and small businesses. Connect with 250,000 travelers eager to support farms like yours by offering space for one RV overnight. No hookups needed. Our members will support your farm and you keep 100% of your revenue. Visit harvesthosts.com today. Hey, Thriving Farmers. Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today's guest is Sam Knapp, co-owner and primary farmer at Offbeet Farm in Fairbanks, Alaska. With a master's degree in plant ecology and years of experience on vegetable farms, Sam built Offbeet Farm from the ground up to focus entirely on storage crops and winter sales through a winter CSA and local markets. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Sam, give us a little bit of an overview of, you got a master's degree in plant ecology. So talk to about kind of like a little bit, when you're getting started, did you go to school knowing that you wanted to be a vegetable farmer?
The master's degree kind of picked up along the way. When I went to college originally, I did not know I wanted to be a farmer at that point. And so my bachelor's degrees are in physics and chemistry. I was on the track to be an engineer and was farm curious all through college and did not have my epiphany until working my first job as kind of a research engineer out of college. I was living in Sweden at the time and found myself, I was volunteering on a farm in the weekends, these folks that I had met at the farmer's market, and I just found that the time I was spending on the farm was a lot more fulfilling than the time I was spending in the office. And that was kind of the first jumping point for me. Eventually then, in order to be able to live with my wife, she was getting a graduate degree. Somebody at the university offered me a funded master's and I jumped on it and treated it like a job, but had a great time getting it along the way.
Cool. I've always said if I could go back to school, I think that ecology degree would be a lot of fun because even after 20 years of farming now, there's so many questions I have about plants. Yeah. And, now, especially with a lot of the biological fungicides, just trying to think about and learn how they interact and how they work would then, inform my ideas of how to use them and stuff like that. So that's always something I'm interested in at this point.
Yeah, I was lucky to have a lot of freedom in the coursework that I took and even kind of some of the projects I took on, and ended up learning a lot about mycorrhizal fungi and interactions in a forest setting, and even took time to, I think I wrote an article for Growing for Market 5 or 6 years ago, just kind of diving into how mycorrhizal fungi apply on farms.
So let's sidestep there and kind of follow that train because that's a big topic there. What did you learn about mycorrhizal fungi?
Well, I think on a general level, learning about who interacts with who was a big thing, that certain plants interact with certain types of mycorrhizal fungi, that most of our horticultural plants interact with a type of mycorrhiza called arbuscular, or endomycorrhizal fungi, and actually most flowering plants do. And then there's a whole different world of mycorrhizal fungi that interact with kind of coniferous trees and birch trees and alders and things like that are ectomycorrhizal fungi. And that when you're inoculating your garden, for example, that it might not be as helpful to incorporate, woody material from those species that are primarily ectomycorrhizal, because it's not the same species interaction that you get with garden plants, for example.
So you're saying that, like, when some people are talking about incorporating wood chips or that kind of thing, I think ramial is
ramial wood chips. Yeah.
Ramial, yes, that is not as helpful as it could be, as we thought at one point.
It just means that you need to pay attention to what species of tree you're adding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like birch, for example, is an exclusively ectomycorrhizal species, and so if you're incorporating birch ramial wood chips, then it might not be as helpful as you think it is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we grow a lot of willow on the farm, and we've always
Hmm.
thought of trying to shred that and send that back through. So
Hmm. I mean, I think it does a lot of interesting things to the ecology as it is,
yes,
but it might not be doing what you think it's doing.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you went through the masters, and then what was next for you?
Well, so while I was getting my master's degree, I was working a part-time farm. It was really my only option to farm was to run a small one of my own. There just weren't many or any vegetable farms in the immediate area, so I was the 3 years of getting my master's doing this kind of part-time farm on the side where it was, what was it, maybe 10 at the beginning, going up to 20 CSA members, doing a winter-only CSA. And after the master's was done, my wife also completed her degree at the same time. She got a job with the National Park Service in Fairbanks, Alaska. And so
Okay.
we drove here in January, and I arrived with the intention of starting a farm. And so we were kind of on the lookout for the right piece of land and property that could make that start. And opening another whole can of worms is our land access issues nationwide, but in Fairbanks, Alaska, farmland is at a premium. There's not very much of it, and you have to be very careful where you are going to start a farm because of permafrost.
Okay.
So we did get a piece of land. We bought a house that had in a residential neighborhood around Fairbanks. Many of the residential neighborhoods have 2 to 3 acres for each parcel.
Okay.
So we picked up a 3-acre parcel that's on a 10 to 15% south-facing slope.
Okay.
And I had to clear the trees. We cleared about an acre and a half and built what's now the main storage building, and have been burning stump piles and soil building and expanding the field slowly ever since, which has
Gotcha.
been quite a process.
Now, talk a little bit more about permafrost. Is permafrost something that if you were to buy like a north-facing property that would never leave, and your south-facing property doesn't have as much, or?
So the Fairbanks area has what's called discontinuous permafrost, where
Okay.
it's kind of like you were talking about, these microclimates that dictate whether or not the soil has deep frozen layers or not. And the danger with trying to farm on a property with permafrost, apart from the soil temperature issues, is that when you clear land and begin to farm on something, you're exposing that soil to much more warmth than it would otherwise be getting, and the permafrost will start to melt. And when that happens, you're going to be melting oftentimes, well, depending on how ice-rich the permafrost is, you might be melting like large underground ice wedges, forming sinkholes, lakes, and just extreme undulations that form out of nowhere. There are farmers in the area who have had to abandon their fields because of a pond forming in the middle of it. Or I saw a photo from a friend's place last year. This isn't funny, but a big ice lens had melted, and they were driving a dump truck over it. An ice wedge can melt underneath after you've cleared a piece of land and begin farming on it. An ice wedge can melt underneath, which will form sinkholes and ponds unexpectedly. So I've seen pieces of property that have been abandoned for farming because of this ice lens topography melting, forming ponds and endless sinkholes. And a friend's place last year, they had an ice wedge that had melted and created a giant pocket, and they accidentally put the front of a dump truck into that hole. So it's an issue that if you're farming on top of permafrost, you don't quite know what's under there, and it can become an insurmountable problem to continue farming on it.
Okay. All right. All right. So you got to find the right piece of property. And then what about like if you're pulling, if it's virgin ground and you're pulling like trees and stuff, what is your pH like?
It's in the mid 5s usually.
Interesting.
We found, so the soil around Fairbanks is very silty. It's this wind-blown loess from glaciers in the area. And I always joke that there's not a rock on the farm that I didn't put there.
Okay.
But that bare silt has almost no pH buffering capacity. So it's easy to change the pH. You don't have to add that much lime to it to bring it up into the mid 6s.
Okay. So, all right. So then what about water?
Yeah, water's a huge thing. One reason why we bought the property we did was because it had a well. And I estimate that maybe a quarter to a third of homes in Fairbanks have a well, and maybe 50% of homes are on water tanks, and the other 25% are dry with no running water.
And what about drilling wells?
So you can drill wells. Our well was punched in by the people who built the house on the property. There was a program years ago that Alaska Native residents could get a well punched in for free.
Oh, wow.
So that's why nobody around us has a well. Our well is 350 feet. And I imagine probably costs more than $30,000 to put in.
So because of your soil type, is there any, I'm assuming it's lined the whole way down. There's no, like typically back in New York, 12 feet down was solid slate. So they'd run in one piece of pipe and then that was all.
It switches to schist
Okay.
after the silt cap. And I don't think that they run into anything else. We're kind of up. The farm itself is at about 750 feet, which is about 300 feet above the valley floor. And so all these hills surrounding Fairbanks are primarily schist, and I think that's the only thing they're running into. Okay.
And I'm not familiar with what is that?
I'm not a geologist either. It's kind of it is not granite.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a sedimentary rock, but it does flake. So it's yeah.
Gotcha. So it's a rock, some sort of rock.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So you've got a well, and we've got the farm. Do you have a lot of tunnels on the property to kind of extend your season?
So we farm entirely outdoors.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's mainly because of our focus on winter storage crops for now. I do make some temporary kind of low tunnels in the spring for seed starting when we move things outdoors, but we're not actually growing any commercial crops in tunnels.
Okay. All right. So then you're growing mainly storage crops that you then store, and you're selling. Where are you selling those during the fall, winter, springtime?
Yeah, it's I'd say 3/4 of that goes through a winter-only CSA, and then the other quarter is made up between a handful of markets and wholesale to 2 stores in town.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, like in a share, what's the typical like contents of a share?
Oh, that's a great question. It changes seasonally. I try to incorporate greens in the early season while I can store kale. So I'll have kale as the green for the first 2 months or so of the share.
Yes.
And then things like carrots and beets. There's turnips, parsnips, winter squash, a little bit of onions, although we have an issue with photo period here for storage onions.
Yes.
Our days are too long in the summer to grow most long day onions. And garlic. I'm trying to think of anything else. But a typical share usually is in the range of 12 to 15 pounds. I have different sizes, but that's like the normal one. So the customers will get 12 to 15 pounds every other week.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then what is the actual growing zone of your area? What's it considered?
That's a great question. I haven't looked recently to see if it changed in the update, but it used to be 1B.
Okay, that's kind of cold.
Yeah. And I don't think the growing zone necessarily, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yes,
As they don't. Our farm is up off the valley floor, and the Fairbanks area has these really interesting temperature inversions in the wintertime because the air is very still. And so if the valley floor down in town is 50 below, it might be 25 below at the farm. And so it's very rare for us to dip below 40 below. I've never seen it happen, but it happens. Town can remain at 40 below or colder for 2 weeks easily.
So at that temperature, yeah, nothing's growing.
No, I mean, I've been interested in. It's something that there's always the folks doing winter growing in greenhouses, and I've always been interested in it, but I have been afraid to try it here because of our just extreme cold and limited daylight in the winter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what does building look like? Are you doing, I forget the technique where they alternate studs, where one stud's on the inside, one's on the outside, so that you can actually have a uninterrupted system of insulation?
Yeah, that's exactly how I built the framed portion of the building. That's where I do my storage and wash pack. I don't know. I've made up the term offset studs. I don't know if that's.
That sounds good enough for me.
Yeah, but other homes have double walls where they'll build a 2x4 wall, and then the top plate and bottom plate will be plywood, and there'll be a 2 to 3 inch gap between the walls.
Okay. Yep. Okay, that would make sense. Then you can just fill that with pretty much any type of insulation.
Yeah, the issue with the offset stud is that you still get like a full thermal bridge on the top and bottom plates.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which you have to make up for with foam or whatever on the inside or outside.
Gotcha, because it's just so cold you'll basically see frost on the walls, I'm assuming, if you don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do regardless, but.
Sheesh. Yeah. Okay, that's some serious cold. All right, so then I'm assuming your coolers you have to heat during the wintertime.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. It's been interesting kind of seeing what has happened with the cooler. So I store usually in the early winter in the cold side there will be around 20,000 pounds of produce in there, and early winter, especially when all that biomass is in there, it's rare that I have to heat. That the building is insulated enough, and through respiration, they're generating enough heat that I'm still pulling in cold air from outside to cool the space down to 10 to 15 below zero.
Okay.
And somewhere around 10 to 15 below is where, it crosses the line into being, it can kind of be at equilibrium for a time. And then if it's going to spend, several days to a week at 20 below or colder, then a 1500 watt space heater is enough to keep things where they need to be.
Okay.
And obviously, you're leaving space around the walls and fans to have good air circulation, so you're not getting cold spots forming.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. And then is there any specific, because from what I understand, you guys don't actually get a tremendous amount of snow. It just stays cold pretty much all winter.
Right. Yeah. This is very different from where I started farming in the UP of Michigan. There we were getting 300 inches a year, but here I think it's anywhere from 80 to maybe 120 is a normal winter. Because it's so cold here, it doesn't ever go away. There's no freeze-thaw cycle. So
you just push it someplace and it just sits there until the spring.
Yeah, I mean, the snowpack can be quite deep. That 120 inches is it compacts a little bit, of course, but none of it is going to melt until spring.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so for your roofing, is it mainly metal on a slope so that it sheds pretty well?
Yeah, it's a regular gabled roof, and most people around here use sheet metal, and it's a cold roof. The ceiling has, oh boy, I think 10.5 inches of rock wool, and then 2 inches of EPS on the inside. So it all amounts to about R50 or R55.
Okay. All right. So what we're learning here is it's expensive to build in Alaska.
It is, and unfortunately, I built during the height of the pandemic.
Oh dear. Yes.
When
so you paid for it.
Oh yeah. A sheet of plywood was $90 at times then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, because not only was the pandemic, it was just crazy prices, but it's Alaska. So getting it there is very expensive.
It is, and that's just kind of a part of farming here, and part of the learning curve of coming here is just getting over the fact that materials are hard to find, and then when you can't find them locally, they're expensive to ship. So we do a lot of things like if we're going to go visit family in the lower 48, we'll bring empty bags with us and fly them back on the airplane, because usually a checked bag fee is a lot cheaper than than shipping something.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So I'll bring back
yeah.
onion sets. I'll bring back 6-foot rolls of Rime.
Yes.
I've done a lot of stuff on airplanes.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so now the crops that you grow, you then harvest, you put in there, you sell in the winter CSA.
Yeah.
So you've been really getting into the storage thing. So talk us through like the different storage facilities you have on your farm.
Yeah, it's all one building, and the building it looks like a garage. It's about 25 feet square.
Okay.
And it's divided in half such that one half of it is the cold storage, which I keep at 32 degrees and like 95 to 100% relative humidity throughout the winter. The other half is kind of the packing area, where I'm wheeling things from the cold side to pack them up for sales. And in the back of that, I keep winter squash, and that space is at about 50 degrees and 50 to 60% relative humidity.
Okay.
And it's kind of a happy accident that those temperatures, so 32 degrees and 95% humidity, and then like 50 degrees and 50 to 60% humidity, actually has around the same amount of moisture in the air. So I'm not having like a humidity drive from one side to the other. I'm not having to like constantly dehumidify or add water into the air because of interactions between the two sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what is your equipment for cooling that? Are you on a CoolBot or are you on actually a real evaporator condenser system?
It's been a CoolBot. I have two 24,000 BTU units that run.
Okay.
They run really only in the month of September and maybe early October, and after the outside temperature switches to maybe in the high 20s, I'm able to cool primarily with outside air. So it's just a thermostat outlet, like an Inkbird, controlling an intake fan.
That just forces in, cold air from the outside.
Yeah, and I, especially around that shoulder season, I do this goofy thing where I take two Inkbirds and I plug them one into the other in series.
Yes.
And that way you're able to watch the outside temperature and the inside temperature and make sure that you're not pulling in air that's too warm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Inkbirds have revolutionized storage.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. So we do a couple we have a triple door cooler. Well, I think it was a freezer that we actually use it for starting ginger and turmeric in the spring. So that's, held at a certain temperature. Then we use it all summer for drying herbs and peppers and fire cider dust and things like that. And then in the fall, we use it for curing sweet potatoes. and then in the winter we'll actually grow mushrooms in it.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it's all, ink
Yeah.
birds and little heaters and stuff. So
Yeah, I'm also using an inkbird humidistat.
yes.
And it's a commercial centrifugal humidifier. And, it works pretty well. I have read and experienced myself that those digital humidistats or hygrometers
Yes.
do a really poor job once
Correct.
you're getting into the high 90s. And so I'll calibrate it to 100% by, locking the sensor in a plastic bag with like a wet paper towel for a couple hours. But you still have to kind of, you're looking for that perfect window where the veggies are staying firm and turgid, and
Yes.
you're not having, like dumping 5 gallons of water into the air in a couple hour period, which has happened, and blowing all my my ground fault outlets in that room.
Yes.
And
Yes, because especially if you're pulling an outside that outside air is going to be very cold and dry.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so now you're going after you're starting to hurt your crops. Now, do you favor like smaller bags around the crops, or do you favor keeping the entire room at a high humidity, which it sounds like you do?
Yeah.
And then just bulk crates.
I favor keeping a high humidity, although it's because of that issue with, being difficult to control the high humidity. I do kind of on a micro scale. I will close things in if necessary. But then you're fighting condensation. It's always this battle between
Correct.
too dry and too wet.
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the psychology. I don't know if it's psychology of the plants or ecology, I guess is the word we're looking for here. What allows a carrot to store for, 8-10 months?
Yeah. I mean, it's really all about their ability to go dormant. When carrots and a lot of the root veggies, they have this dormancy that is induced by the environmental conditions around them. And so they're just ramping their metabolism way down in response to near freezing temperatures. And so long as you're able to provide those conditions, they're not going to be metabolizing the sugars that are available to them and kind of accelerating that degradation. And it's really because of their life cycle that people bred them into being biennial plants. And so it's the way that they survive or are supposed to survive the winter if they were to grow again the following season.
Now, in some places in Canada, they actually leave the carrots in the ground with straw, and then they'll harvest actually during the winter or super early spring. And it seems like they do that because the quality is really great, or is it because they don't have enough storage, or maybe it's a combination of the both?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what their motivation is. I think it can be done if it's not too cold out. Here in interior Alaska, interior Alaska is an extreme that most other places don't have to deal with. And so I see carrots and parsnips, for example, survive the winter if I've missed them in the ground.
Yes.
But their texture is off. They have frozen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say carrots much worse texture than parsnips, but parsnips will
absolutely.
go a little bit weird. And I think probably you're so cold that you're probably at the extreme of what parsnips can handle. When we did parsnips in New York, we were zone 4, and we actually would leave them and just wait till the spring to harvest them, and they were perfect. But I can
Did
see
you
at,
Did you have issues with rodents?
With parsnips, no, but with carrots, oh my gosh, yes. For some reason, they don't really go after parsnips. At least for us, they didn't. But for carrots, they will just wipe you out.
Yeah, I think that's been if this was an option to me.
Yeah.
I think that might be a reason why I might shy away from it, or have to come up with some kind of more extreme pest
Yes.
mitigation strategies.
Yes. Yeah.
Like voles are a big problem here, and we deploy an army of traps through the summertime and cats and are able to control it that way.
So let's dive on that for a second, because that's
Yeah.
actually 2 days ago we killed 15 voles in about 15 minutes.
Nice.
Yes. Well, we created the perfect habitat. It was next to a greenhouse. So there was the edge effect that they were, and then inside the greenhouse was some landscape fabric that could climb underneath. Outside the greenhouse was 4 beds of landscape fabric. It was they loved what was inside and outside, so they had perfect food, and it was super dry, so that they just basically the population exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you do? That's the question. What do you do to fight the good fight?
Yeah. It's constant vigilance.
Yes.
I use a Victor is the brand of mousetrap. They make a plastic rat trap that is easy to set with one hand.
Okay.
Just the way that the mechanism is designed. And I set those under these little plywood boxes that have kind of like half moon openings on either end. And I'll usually bait them with peanut butter. But they'll, out of curiosity or enticement for the bait, they'll shove their heads through the hole and get whammed.
Interesting.
So I have maybe 24 of those around the farm, starting in mid-July and onward, and I'm just constantly checking and rebaiting. And then beyond that, our cats do a lot of damage to the vole population. But I do have an area that my wife does chickens kind of as a hobby, and before we cleared the farm field, there was an area where the chickens currently are that we had a small garden in, and I was growing squash in there for a couple years and was not controlling the voles. And the last year that I grew in there, I lost almost all the squash. You'd see a 8-10 pound squash that half of it was eaten out.
Sheesh. Yeah.
Yeah,
rodent. So, a farm nearby from us, they grow a fair amount of sweet potatoes. They wholesale them, and we buy them wholesale. But I also was like, hey, if you collect your seconds, I'll buy your seconds, because we do soups, we do cubed sweet potatoes for the store. But they we don't want to mess with that. So you can just come out here and glean them for free. So we went over a couple times, and I think we got probably 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
But I mean, rodents are they can be an incredible problem.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I think of it like a population dynamics thing, that if left on check, that population is just going to grow exponentially because you've created a perfect environment for them. And the only way to control them is through constant trapping. To avoid that population from building up and then spiking.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. We've gone to 15-inch pieces of 4-inch drain pipe. And then we drill a hole in the top and bottom, a small hole, where we stick a flag through it, like one of those little property marking flags.
Yeah.
And then skewered on that flag is a Agrid 3 bait block.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not convinced that that's any better than snap traps, and I think I probably will go ahead and try your snap trap method there. But the nice thing about the flag is it just lets you know where it is, even if the weeds start to grow a little bit.
Yeah, and I use flags as well to mark where all my boxes are.
Okay.
And I should say that the box that I put over the traps is really for to stop me from catching birds and from hurting my cats.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and how big is that half moon, the hole that you make?
Oh, I drilled it with a hole saw and then cut the piece in half, and so I was probably using an 1.5 or 2-inch hole saw.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay, very cool. All right, so what are the other main challenges with growing where you're growing?
Oh boy, I think the season length is, of course, an issue. Coming from the Midwest, the fact that the change from fall into winter here is so abrupt, and that was a big learning curve to get over. That, we don't have a long, drawn-out fall in interior Alaska. You almost jump straight from summer into winter.
Okay.
So by our average freeze-up date when the ground is going to begin freezing is October 10th.
Oh dear. So are you frozen up now?
Oh yeah, we've had snow I've been skiing for 3 weeks now.
Oh dear. We were harvesting carrots today. We just started
Wow.
harvesting our fall carrots.
Yeah.
I was borrowing a tractor to lay the plastic for the overwintered onions, and so I had the big tractor here, and so we lifted 2 beds, and they're looking beautiful. But
That's awesome.
yeah, we're just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, so as a storage, as like a storage farmer, I really have to pay attention to like matching the labor availability and my equipment to the amount of time that I have to get those things out of the ground. Like the time between they're ready, which is around early September for most of the storage crops. And I usually set a deadline as October 1st. I try to be done because, it might snow a foot on the 20th of September, or we might have an early cold snap. So just a little bit of risk mitigation and scheduling is important.
So then you have to bring in basically a massive crew for just a very short period of time.
Yeah, that's one option. What I've been doing is just increasing my crew to 2 or 3 people and working solid for a month. All we do is harvest and wash for an entire month.
Interesting.
Because we're not going to markets until we're done.
Okay. All right. So then you put everything in storage, and then when are people signing up for your CSA?
I'm signing up. I have them sign up in August, and I'm kind of filling it through September. And the CSA starts either very late October. So I had my first drop off last week. Very late October or the beginning of November is usually when I start.
Okay. All right. And
just to give myself a break.
Yes. Okay. All right. And you have actually put a lot of this information we've talked about in a book. You've got a book coming out. This is through Chelsea Green called Beyond the Root Cellar.
Yeah.
So share a little bit about kind of what drove you to write the book and kind of what will folks find inside.
The impetus for writing this book really came from a frustration while learning how to do storage crops and storing vegetables and selling them through the wintertime, which I started doing when I was in Michigan. I found that most of the information out there was geared towards kind of home gardeners and homesteaders, doing it on a smaller scale, and just not a lot of information for commercial growers out there. And I hear so many people talk kind of casually about like, oh, we do storage crops, or we store carrots, or we store this or that. But for folks who have never done it before and never worked for people who do, there's such a huge learning curve to it. And it's hard to say when noticing that issue turned from like, somebody should definitely write a book on this to I should write a book on this. But that I crossed that bridge at some point, and decided to write it. And I know I'm very aware, and the publisher also made me very aware of my limited experience. I've only been storage farming at this point for 7 or 8 years. As opposed to there are people doing it right now who have been doing it for 30, 40 years. And so I really set out to not focus on my experience so much and interview farmers from across the country who are doing this successfully already, and kind of hearing their stories and diving deeply into their methods. So there's a whole section of the book where it's almost like mini farm visits, where you're hearing exactly how these folks are doing it, diving into the nitty gritty of what exactly they're doing to get their storage crops, harvested, processed, and into storage, and like how they built their buildings and so on. And then there's a whole different component of the book that kind of dives into the current research. And I suppose I wanted to use my, all the time that I had spent reading scientific papers in grad school, and just the ability to kind of You know, I hate to say the ability to understand, because I think a lot of people can read those papers, as boring as they can be. They can read them and understand the gist of what they're getting at, but just taking time to read through the current body of science and distill that information into something that is easily digestible for everybody out there. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get away from, like anecdote. I think there's so much bad information about storage out there from, oh, I do this one thing and it works well in my location this one time, but
correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you on that. There is a lot of learned experience, but we also have to realize there's also a great scientific knowledge out there, a lot that's coming out of the extension community. And again, I always say you have to take everything with a grain of salt, because I like to tell a story of being at a conference in upstate New York where I was sitting there and the extension speaker was talking about how you couldn't grow lettuce in the wintertime. It just didn't work. And I was kind of like inwardly a little cringe because my talk was how I grew lettuce in the wintertime.
Exactly.
So again, I know the guy who gave the talk. He's a great extension agent. But again, they just were doing things differently than we are. So,
Totally.
but again, there's I don't know if you have it, but it's a green book, and it's actually a paper book. And it was literally, the version I have is literally a stack of papers stapled together with a big industrial stapler that is on winter storage crop storage. Well, it's on storage. I'm sure you...
Is it the USDA's
Yes.
commercial storage handbook?
Yes. Yeah.
That's an invaluable resource.
Yeah, that's a really great resource. But again, your book has gone so much further than that. I mean, that is basically the handbook for what temperature for what crop. But I mean, I'm looking through your book right now. I literally just got it the other day. But and I've been storing for 20 years now. So I mean, we would store 40,000 pounds a year in 4 different storage areas. But I have already, in just 2 days, looking through your book, have picked up 2 ideas that I think are going to be revolutionary, great ideas. I mean, like the one idea, and I think it's page 53 for me, and this is an uncorrected proof, but the fact that you're using these mega bags to store kale, that is so cool. That changes. I mean, we were using bigger bins, and that was just a pain because bins are expensive, but kale is so light. So why wouldn't you just use these giant bags? So there's some fabulous information in here, and I'm super excited to really dive down into it because I mean, we were storing a lot of food, but there's so many ideas here that because you've done so much research and interview for so many different people.
Yeah, I think a fun part of talking with people and doing the research was finding places where people's methods disagree, but they both are working, and so I really did my best to present everything.
Yeah.
When possible. I think like garlic was a great example of that. There are a lot of people, you look at the science and the science says store garlic at 32 degrees.
Correct.
And there's a whole bunch of people out there storing their garlic in the mid 50s and saying that it's working great. And you can't discount those people's experiences because, obviously they're having them.
Yes. Yeah. And it's nice thing is you interviewed some really good people for this too, like TP Produce. I mean, they're legendary and everything they've done, how long they've been farming. So, that was a really great, interview that you're able to do. So, but I mean, like some of these guys are doing 300,000 pounds of winter storage crops. So, seeing that kind of volume too, when you're dealing with that kind of volume, you really got to dial it in so you know your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, even as a small grower myself, who uses mostly hand tools, to know how the big guys do it. Know how does an industrial carrot harvester work, and how are they using them? It's super interesting. Because I can take some of the things that they're doing, just the concepts, and apply them on my own farm.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. What would you say your biggest learning experience was through doing the book, writing the book?
Oh, that's a great question. It's hard to put my finger on any one, piece of thing, because I think everything that I wrote about, I was learning the whole time, through different people's methods and researching building techniques and the science of vegetable physiology. But I can give like kind of smaller examples. I learned so much, for example, when I interviewed one of the like head technicians at Store It Cold.
Yeah.
And got to chat about how a CoolBot works, how an air conditioner works, and what are the limitations of a CoolBot compared to a commercial system.
Yes.
And that was extremely interesting. Like, for example, understanding that, like, why can't a CoolBot go under 32 degrees? And it's because the defrosting, like the way that you defrost an air conditioner with a CoolBot is with air from inside the cooler that's running through those fins. And the closer you're getting to freezing, the harder it is for the air in your cooler to melt the ice on the fins. So just dialing in on things like that, like kind of understanding the practical reasons of why,
Yes.
Why things are the way they are.
Yeah, we need to build a 28 degree cooler. And so that has to be a commercial unit.
Yeah, because it needs like a heated defrost cycle, for example.
Exactly. Yep. Cool. Well, Sam, anything else you'd like to share before we go?
Boy, oh boy. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I just thank you for doing this podcast. I've after learning about it, I've been listening to a few episodes and have picked up a lot of tips out there. So
good.
Thanks for what you do.
Yeah, we have some great guests. I don't know about the host, but we have some great guests. So. All right, Sam. Well, thank you for coming on. Appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great to talk to you.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.